This week, the candidates running for the U.S. Senate seat here in Texas dropped their latest fundraising figures, and they show a pretty significant advantage for the Democrat. James Tallarico said his campaign set a record during the first quarter of the year, while Republican John Cornyn said he outraised his challenger, Ken Paxton, ahead of their upcoming runoff. Joining us now to discuss what those campaign finance reports showed is Gabby Birnbaum with the Texas Tribune. Gabby, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
The Tallarico campaign had a pretty notable week, with the state rep also pulling in an endorsement from the political arm of the Texas AFL-CIO. But talk to us about what his campaign raised during the past few months. What stood out with that?
Yeah, so since the beginning of January, Tallarico raised $27 million, which is a pretty jaw-dropping figure. It's not just a record for the first quarter of a race in Texas in the election year, it's a record for first quarters all over the country. So this is the best first quarter in an election year that any candidate has ever had. He did spend a lot of that money, right, because he was in this primary with Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. But I think, perhaps even more importantly, going into the beginning of April, which is when the report cuts off, he still had more money left on hand than either of his potential Republican challengers, who are going to still have to spend money against each other.
Yeah, before we want to move on now to what the Republicans have shown, both candidates in the primary runoff lagged far behind Tallarico with the figures that they raised. So what is that breakdown for John Cornyn and Ken Paxton?
Yeah, so John Cornyn still has more money, right, than Ken Paxton. That's been the reality throughout the cycle. Senator Cornyn raised about $9 million. AG Paxton raised about $2.2 million in the first quarter. And then moving into this final stretch of the runoff, Senator Cornyn has about $8.2 million in cash on hand. Paxton has about $2.6 million. So that's been the dynamic all throughout. Cornyn has raised more money, spent more money, and the groups that are supporting him are better funded than the groups supporting Paxton as well. So we just saw a continuation of that dynamic as we close in on the May 26th runoff here.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are wondering now, how does this really position the two of them ahead of their next face-off in the primary runoff on May 26th?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to continue to see from allies of Senator Cornyn and from his campaign himself, spending really ramp up in these last 6 weeks. The major super PAC that's supporting him, Texans for a Conservative Majority, just made $1 million expenditure. So I think Texans can expect to see a lot more ads, when they turn on their TV, much like it was in February, right? And now that it's just a one-on-one race between Cornyn and Paxton, I think it's clear that Senator Cornyn and his camp have the details to sort of run negative attack ads on Paxton. And then the Paxton camp, I think, also intends to do, more negative ads directly at Cornyn. I mean, there's no Wesley Hunt anymore. It's just mano a mano with these two. And I think you can expect to see a lot of negativity in these last 6 weeks.
Absolutely. You just mentioned there the super PACs that are supporting these candidates. There are also some spending reports about what those are taking in and also spending on ads and things like that. What stood out to you in that? What did those show?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a few major donors that have throughout the cycle given to Senator Cornyn and to the PACs supporting him, and that was no exception here. Again, that major super PAC, Texans for a Conservative Majority, that supports Cornyn, raised about $9.5 million in the first quarter, and they spent $11.7 million, right? So they really, during the primary, deployed a lot of energy boosting Cornyn and attacking his enemies, but mostly in positive ads on Cornyn. At the end of March, they still had about $3 million in cash on hand, and like I mentioned, they just made that $1 million expenditure, so no doubt, they have resources. The PAC supporting Paxton also raised about $2 million, spent about $4 million through the end of March. They've got $1 million left on hand going into April. So again, there's resources that that they have. They just have diminished capacity at the moment compared to Cornyn allies in the PAC world for what they can do and how much money they can spend.
Ooh, so much money being spent on this, and we are not even to the November general election just yet. If you would like to read more about some of those fundraising figures, you can check out the Texas Tribune's website and see Gabby's 2 stories on this. Gabby, thanks again for joining us, and we always appreciate having you here on our show.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.